This is the Welcome to Humanity podcast with thought leader and transformative psychiatrist, Dr. Fred Moss. This show focuses on the betterment of humanity on a global scale. Each episode will leave you enlightened, inspired, and ready to make an impact in your world. Welcome to the show. Welcome to your life. Welcome to humanity. Here's Dr. Fred.
Welcome to another episode of the Welcome to Humanity podcast. It is always my pleasure to be with you, and it's always my pleasure to introduce you to guests. And as most of you know, if you've listened to any previous podcasts on the Welcome to Humanity broadcasting, many times I've not even met, in most occasions actually, I've not even met the guests. So I get to meet them with you, and we get to explore really what makes them tick, what makes them work, what about their humanity can be inspiring. And it doesn't have to be good things. It doesn't have to be great things. It doesn't have to be things that are completely over the top, although sometimes it is. It's sometimes just looking at the person's direct humanity and having them share with us that which matters to them, that which is important to them, that which turns them on, that which is an inspiration. And today I think we have an excellent opportunity to both be introduced to a person that I heard a little bit about in the last few days from someone I work with, Roselle, who is introducing me to Dr. Rob Carpenter. And she was so enthusiastic. I was like, I remember a Rob Carpenter who played in the NFL and next to Earl Campbell. And I also, I'm like, it's not him. So who is this Dr. Rob Carpenter I'm supposed to have? And I did a little bit of research after looking at his bio, and I was like, oh, we need to have him on. Dr. Rob Carpenter, welcome to the Welcome to Humanity podcast. It's a sheer pleasure to have you on the show. How you doing?
Thank you, Dr. Fred. Really appreciate it. I'm doing absolutely fantastic today and appreciate the opportunity. It's an honor and a privilege to be on your show.
Well, it really is great to be here. And you did good with a scripted answer of what it takes to say, thank you when you come on to a podcast like this. Each and every one of us is really dealing with something, right? No matter whether we're tackling some of the big problems in the world or maybe even the tiny ones, we all face challenges. Now, I've been a psychiatrist for many years, and I've worked with all kinds of people from all walks of life. I've worked with more people than I can really count, from various backgrounds, dealing with more issues than you can imagine, of all sizes and shapes. So naturally, over time, I've developed a number of ways to assist others in gaining a new sense of freedom and empowerment. Now, I'm pulling back the curtain on one of those methodologies, and I'm going public, revealing the process and associated mindset that contributed to using this particular method with maximum effectiveness. It's all laid out in my new book called Creative Aid, Healing Through Creativity and Self-Expression. You can pick this book up on Amazon.com in either Kindle or paperback format. And as a listener to the Welcome to Humanity podcast, I'd like to offer you a completely free copy in audiobook format. Just go to welcometohumanity.net/creative and download your free audiobook copy of Creative Aid today. I really look forward to hearing about your Creative Aid breakthrough. Now let's get back to this amazing conversation. Welcome to humanity. So now we're going to get into brass tacks, Dr. Carpenter, and we're going to really get to, and how do you want me to call you? Dr. Rob, Dr. Carpenter, Rob, anything? Don't call me late for dinner, that kind of.
People call me different things. Typically I go by Dr. Rob, but my mom says, hey, you. So it just really depends on what you want to call me. I'm okay with anything, really.
All right. Well, hey, you, we're going to go here, and we're going to go with the question I often ask when I haven't met somebody. It's almost become a little staple of the Welcome to Humanity podcast. And it's a 9-letter, completely grammatically correct question that'll allow you to go back on your heels as you explore it. And the question really is, Dr. Rob Carpenter, who are you?
That's a fantastic question, and it reminds me of a story, an incident that happened to me maybe about a decade ago. I was meeting with a friend, and I was scribbling down a business idea that I had for him, and he looked at the idea, and he's a very smart guy, and he basically pushed the piece of paper that I scribbled it on back to me, and he said, Robert, I need you to surrender to the person you're called to become. And that was not the statement I was expecting from him. Nor was it a statement that I'd ever heard really anybody make before. And I remember meditating and reflecting on that, trying to think, who actually am I? And it's interesting because as that was going on, I probably encountered one of my most existential moments shortly thereafter. I was from Los Angeles. I was living in downtown Los Angeles at the time, and I was crossing the street on foot from one side of the street to the next on Sunset Boulevard. And as I was crossing the street, a car came to make a right-hand turn, and I turned around and I sort of gestured to it to say, slow down. And as I did that, the car slowed down, but unbeknownst to me, there was a car that was coming to make a left-hand turn, and it smacked me, and I flew into the windshield, flipped over the top of the car, smacked the pavement. My head was gushing blood. I couldn't feel my front teeth, and I basically was like, what just went on? And then an ambulance came, and the next thing I knew, I was in the ER, and my head was wrapped like a mummy. And I remember the doctors came to me and said, you have a lot of lacerations, and you have a skull fracture, and this is going to be very expensive. And I remember Dr. Fred in that moment telling them, I'm not going to have any lacerations or scars. I don't have a skull fracture, and I'm not going to pay for this. And I think they probably thought, well, he's drugged up, and so he doesn't know what he's talking about. Well, a few short weeks later, they took off the mummy mask they had me wrapped in, and the doctor looked at me and said, you have a lovely face. And I said, hallelujah. Then a couple of weeks later, I went to the neurologist, and neurosurgeon looked at my brain scans, and they said, well, give us a moment. And they called down to the department that did the initial scan and said, this young man doesn't have a skull fracture. And they went to the back, the neurologist, the neurosurgeon, and they came out again maybe 10 minutes later and said, this is all gratis. It's on the house. You don't have to pay for anything. And I remember in that moment sort of realizing who I was. I knew that I basically was a person who manifested his reality through the power of mindset, through the power of belief, that you can essentially self-heal through mindset, that you can almost override your circumstances through positive thinking, positive psychology. And it wasn't something that I was experimenting on. This was just kind of a natural response. And so everything in my life, from writing books to making films to teaching, has really been about how do we manifest positive reality for ourselves. And so that would probably be the long answer to who am I? I believe I'm just somebody who is trying to do good and have fun and leave a positive legacy for those around me and be a pleasurable experience for them as well.
All right. Well, let's see. So, thank you for embedding that incredible story in the midst of this. And thank you for announcing and declaring who you are as a manifester of your own reality. And thank you for really sharing what it takes to have a commitment to mindset and belief, such that things that would otherwise be completely unimaginable from a different mindset and belief, or a different manifesting context, could not occur, would not occur. So, in fact, you could say straddling in the world of miracle, that which is outside the range of likely possible realities. I get that there is this, like, who you were for the slow car, the right turning car, is really interesting as you can get banged around by the left turning car. And there's something about, actually, this is not how this is going to go. Thank you for your opinion, but that is not how this is going to go.
Mm-hmm.
And then owning and being that, and really in short order, walking away without a skull fracture, without lacerations, without scars, and oh yeah, it's gratis too. And you know what? My guess is, Rob, is that you have in some ways countless or ongoing opportunities, like minute by minute, to simply realize that you are your own manifestation. You are your own manifester of the dominion of reality that you traffic in down here. Is that fair to say?
I would say I think that's very fair to say, because if you think about great people like Muhammad Ali would always say to himself and to others, announce to the world that he is the greatest, or he was the greatest. And
Yeah, he did say that.
I believe that, but if you look at his record, he actually wasn't the greatest. However, I think he talked himself into greatness. And I think that we have the ability to do that. If you look at great athletes like him, like Michael Jordan, like the late Kobe Bryant, and many others, that their internal story they told themselves was very different, not just than the average person, but compared to the average athlete, or even compared to the average elite athlete, that they sort of told themselves a story that became their reality over time. And I think for me, that's sort of always been the case. Growing up half black, half white in an all white household, because my mom, who's white, remarried to a white gentleman in an all Latino neighborhood with Jewish and Asian best friends. And I just remember having a very different reality, I learned over time, than how most people grew up in the country or around the world. And so the way that I've always sort of looked at the world and experienced it has been very different, even just from a demographic point of view or from a psychographic point of view. And I've always sort of looked at life sort of saying, okay, well, I don't need my experiences to be like other people's. And I don't need to follow the same type of career path like other people. I've lived 1,000 different lives before becoming an author and a filmmaker, for example, and doing different things. And I think that's because, like you said, the ability to manifest these things, it all starts with that kernel of a thought. And that thought can turn into something once we sort of meditate on it and enough, and we put ourselves in positions to. I think people underestimate their ability to navigate the world, to navigate their careers, or to navigate even hardships or various circumstances, because a lot of times there's doubting thoughts, there are limiting thoughts that people put on themselves. And the thing is, I wasn't, Dr. Fred, going to allow people to put limiting thoughts on me or myself. And I think that that's one of the things that prevents us from manifesting reality, from manifesting greatness, is when we put limiting thoughts on ourselves or allow other people to put limiting thoughts on us. And once we get into one or both of those scenarios in terms of limiting thoughts, it's very difficult to manifest miracles, outside of the realm of typical possibilities. It's very difficult to manifest even, books. I know you're an author as well. It's very difficult to manifest films. It's very difficult to do any of these things that, to the average person, they say, well, it has to be somebody who's extraordinarily lucky or extraordinarily talented or a genius. And the reality is, it doesn't have to be any of those things. It all really stems from that story you tell yourself. And that the story that I tell myself is that I do manifest these things, that there is greatness within me, as Tony Robbins would say, and that there is greatness within everybody.
So, the idea when creating a future, Rob, do you get the notion that if you don't do anything about manifesting yourself limitlessly, that the default will lead to accepting our or others' limiting beliefs in other words, if we don't take hold of this, if we don't take it by the horns, this notion you're speaking of manifesting an extraordinary reality and then living into that, if we don't do that, the default is one that is really counter to that has me living small, that has me living limited. It isn't like the neutral is standing still. It's like if I don't do anything, I'm going to accept limiting beliefs as being my reality. It's like skewed to the negative, if you will, skewed to the contained, to the overly contained. Any thoughts about that?
That's a fantastic question, Dr. Fred, and I agree with the premise of it. I think that the world is set up in a way that keeps us limited. It's set up in a way that keeps us obedient. It's set up in a way to think and live small, because it only wants 50 people to think and live big. And I think that I'm not one of those big believers who believes that destiny is going to happen on its own, that fate is going to happen on its own. I believe that our decisions create our destiny. And I think because when we think that just destiny creates itself or fate creates itself, it takes us out of the position of personal responsibility to manifest the individual destinies we want, or the family destinies, or the community destinies, or the world destiny. And I think that we have to put ourselves squarely in the driver's seat in terms of manifesting that reality through the micro and the macro decisions that we make. The world, Steve Jobs once said, was created by people who were no smarter than us. The institutions, political institutions, the economic institutions, the entertainment institutions were set up by people who thought differently. And so they created systems that worked for them, but in their generations, but we have to set up systems that work for us in our generations, both as individuals as well as a communal group of people. And I think that if we don't, we are going to play small. I think you might have those occasional stories where you have the person that says, oh, well, I just fell into the Forrest Gump type of story. But I think that is rare and rare. And I think a lot of times people just wait around sort of wanting destiny to happen to them because they think their talents or their ability or their hard work or any of these number of things will be the deciding variable or the deciding factor in moving them forward. But the reality is that none of those things on their own are the deciding factor. The first step to choosing your future is to choose your future. The older I get, Dr. Fred, the more I believe that in simplicity, the more I believe that we have to make simple decisions stemming from simple thoughts, such as I'm going to do X, Y, or Z with my life, or I'm going to create X, Y, or Z outcome in my community, and I'm going to essentially create a roadmap in terms of getting there. And as basic as that sounds, a lot of people don't do that. I think 97% of people don't write their goals down. And so if you don't write your goals down, if you don't write your future down, if you're not talking about it, if you're not talking about ideas, concepts, and dreams, you're not talking about destiny, if you're not surrounding yourself with other people who are sort of, destiny dreamers and destiny doers, it becomes extremely difficult to do. One of the things I love about Los Angeles is that there are so many dreamers from all over the world
Oh, yeah.
who move here, who want to be the next big thing, whether it's an actor or director or a producer or what have you. But people who have this crazy belief that maybe, just maybe, their hoped destiny will come true, probably more than anywhere in the world, maybe with the exception of Silicon Valley and to some degree New York. But in Los Angeles and Hollywood in particular, there's this ethos from people, not necessarily from the people who were born here, but from the people who come here and who put themselves in position to at least attempt to go after their reality. I think that we have to do that because otherwise the default from our families or from our communities or from the world, they're going to tell us we can't do it, or they're going to believe that we can't do it, or they're going to tell us to play it safe. 70% of all people follow in their parents' footsteps in terms of professions, at least in the state of California, though it might be true nationwide as well. And it's interesting because I think what happens is if you try to veer off, to a different track, people tell you you're crazy, they tell you you're stupid, and they tell you you're not going to be able to do it. And it doesn't matter what kind of family background you come from. You could be in a great family background, you can be in a broken family background, but oftentimes you don't have that unconditional support from parents for a variety of reasons, because they don't understand it, or because they fear it, or because they're trying to look out for you, but they really love you. There are a variety of reasons why. But the reality is, it starts with believing that we can manifest our futures, but it really does start there. And we have to make decisions to do that. Not one big decision, not one big fateful event, but a series of small decisions. It's interesting, Dr. Fred, because as I think about the future and I think about having a successful future, it's really amazing how simple success is, how you can simply follow formulas in life, routines. You can discipline yourself in different professions and careers. There's so many people who have come before us, who have shown us the way, and who have often written about the way, and they put it in books, or they put it typically in the past in books, but now it's in more and more mediums. And all we literally have to do is look at the playbooks and say, okay, how can I adapt that to my life? How can I make my future similar to theirs? And so it starts with deciding that you want to do it.
So deciding if you want to do it, it is, looking at the theme some more, and you are certainly exquisitely articulate about this topic. So I just want to acknowledge the impact you're making each and every sentence. Worth listening to. So thank you for being all of that, and whatever it took for you to grow up in the life you've grown up with and wound up being as articulate and exquisite in your capacity to deliver these fairly beautiful concepts to all of humanity. It's really something. So congratulations and thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
The issues that you're welcome. The issues that I'm looking at here that, I've been taking some notes while you speak, and you spoke a little bit about Muhammad Ali, Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant. You didn't say other names, but there's these athletes, Serena Williams or Tiger Woods, or these athletes that are the great, like literally are the greatest. And there's something about never actually being satisfied at having now become the greatest. In other words, the next stride is from here forward.
Mm-hmm.
Accepting greatness now doesn't mean that we now get to be complacent about how we're at the top of our game. Frankly, not at all. The reason we got at the top of the game is that we continue to strive forward into a world that has never occurred before, into like the next records that these people break will be their own all the time. That's all that's left, their own records. And, it isn't about others. It's about simply striving to be the greatest. So, or not even striving, declaring themselves as such and living into it. It's not like maybe someday, it's like now. And the issues that seem to have boiled out of this for me as you were speaking were, well, the two issues that came out were safety and fear. And I wanted to see if I could infiltrate your thinking here about this, because some people would say that the reason I don't go out there and do something that no one has ever done is I'm afraid of that it won't work, or that it'll backfire, or that, that somehow I'll be a failure. And that's why I don't, that might be why I'm not going to venture out beyond my little box here and try or be or do something new. No, because I feel safe in the familiar. Now, that is an illusion. I'm sure you agree that's where safety resides. But there is something about doing something that's never been done before and thereby, defined as being unfamiliar, does feel unsafe. Like what if I fall off the cliff? What if the plane doesn't fly? What if, I lose all my money? What if my wife leaves me? What if, and those things are like, well, one way to avoid that happening is to just not manifest a large life.
Mhm.
So, is it actually safer, Rob, to go out there and manifest a life that works? Or is it, in fact, truly safer to sort of stay in my box and, eat the same donuts every day?
That's a fantastic question. In my book, The 40 Laws of Happiness, I have a chapter on fear. And one of the interesting things about fear is that most fears, or most of our fears, don't actually happen to us. We think about them, we meditate on them, and they end up not becoming true. But the worst part about the fear is that they paralyze our thinking and our action. And they bring us anxiety and negative physical symptoms because we are so focused on the potential negative of the downside of what happens if things don't work out for us. And the interesting thing about fear, or even about death, is that it has a 100% success rate. So that the average person maybe lives around 30,000 days, around 80 years. And so that's not a lot of time compared to how old the earth is, billions of years old. We don't have a lot of time that we're here. And I think that people can have a choice to play it safe or to play it big. But I think that it's actually much more difficult to play it safe because I think the potential for anxiety, the potential for regret, the potential for depression, for sadness, for not working in the type of job that you want to. I think it's like 88% of people are working in a job that they hate, or at least that they're not totally happy with. And so to me, if you look at those things where you're playing it safe, the way society wants you to play it, yeah, basically you're saying, okay, I'm probably going to be unhappy in my job, and my unhappiness in my job is going to spill over into my personal life, and that's going to cause some sadness, which is going to manifest some negative biochemical issues in my body. It's going to produce things like cortisol and other things. I'm going to become physically ill by it, and we can just literally take this down the line in terms of some of the negative implications of it. Versus, okay, let me actually go out there and see if I can manifest my reality. Maybe statistically, the likelihood for me becoming a director or an author or whatever it is that we're attempting to do, setting a world record, is not high, but at the same time, it becomes higher when we decide to do it. And in fact, we become happier when we attempt to enter the journey, because happiness is about the journey, not the destination. And so if we commit to living these extraordinary lives and make it about the journey, about the people that we meet in the journey, about the destinations we go, could be internal destinations, doesn't have to be physical geographic destinations. But if we commit to saying success is in the journey and not in the end result, we will live lives more than we could ever have imagined. And I think that is healthier than sort of committing small. I mean, even the science, I think, shows, because for happy, our bodies are releasing serotonin and endorphins and dopamine, and we're at a much physically safer place than when we aren't. And of course, I'm generalizing here. We typically will tend to have better relationships because we are happier and we're attracting we attract people who are similar to us. So we're going to be attracting similar, happy type of risk takers. I know that's happened in my life. I just look around, for example, at all of my friends, and I'm like, wow, look at this best-selling author, that best-selling author. And one of my friends today is up for 4 Emmys, for writing a Super Bowl commercial with Viola Davis, and my producing partner, got an Academy Award. And I think about all the people that are sort of in my social circle, and none of this was by design. I didn't go out there to sort of say, I'm going to have this person and that person. I wasn't calculating about it. It was just, I attracted who I am in terms of other positive people who were committed to living an extraordinary journey, not just an extraordinary end result. And so I think that they would say that they took risks, but at the same time, on a personal basis, on a health basis, on a relationship basis, to me, it seems much safer than playing it small, where there are all of these potential, negative repercussions, that could be hoisted upon us, at least from what we see from the data. So I know it's different for every person, because they'll say, well, you're the story that made it. What about all the people that didn't make it? And so there's always kind of that counter question. But the reality is, if the people who didn't quote unquote make it were looking at the journey they would say, you know what, they did make it because they took that first step and that second step and that third step to become who they're supposed to be. And it goes back to what I sort of said at the beginning of the podcast. It's that when we surrender to who we're supposed to be, who we're called to become, that is the greatest success that we can have, not what's in our bank accounts, not how much our names are in lights or any of those sorts of things. It's really truly about defining what that is for us. And if thinking big and taking big risks is about happiness, is about success as defined as movement toward a worthwhile goal, is about peace and order in our lives and great relationships, then we can't go wrong if we try to live big.
Yeah, it's very, very, very fascinating that maybe one of the grand illusions is that because this is, I think, you made this clear in this last piece, which is there's a grand illusion that if I stay small, I'm keeping myself safe. But with the evidence that you just brought forth, if you stay small, you're almost guaranteeing an unsafe experience through life, and certainly an unsatisfying one. There's a much higher likelihood of you having unsafe circumstances or experiences occur to you, predicaments as a function of not playing large, as a function of being miserable, as a function of having your body physically break down or your relationships completely break down, or whatever you're going to do to mitigate the fact that your life isn't working. So whatever type of addictions you might pick up, or whatever type of self-destructive tendencies you might pick up, or how many people you might hurt, or lying, cheating, stealing as a way of manifesting a life that isn't working, violence either to yourself or others. All those things are not so far away from playing small, and for playing a life that you accept in the world of scarcity as being miserable. And in the meantime, just playing with the idea of manifesting a life that works, a large life that really, where I can be the creator of a life that is extraordinary, even exploring beyond any boundaries, things that have never been said or done before, or playing around with the people, like you said, like manifesting a network of people around me that actually support risk taking, that support making something happen that never happened before, doing new and novel things, then also drives open the possibility of me living large. And it frankly sure seems to deeply decrease the likelihood of those things that I say I'm afraid of when I pretend to be safe by living in a small box. It's extraordinary, right? In some ways, back to counterintuitive. Now we'll take the word intuitive. The intuitive you were talking about is different than this intuitive. But, counterintuitively, or maybe different than what we're taught rather than counterintuitively, it seems like, wow, it's actually unsafe to play small and safe to take risks.
That's such a beautiful premise, Dr. Fred, and I agree with that. And I go back to a story. I was teaching at university in Los Angeles, and I remember being a very young professor. I was younger than half of my students. That's how young I was. And what's interesting, I learned this was at Cal State University of Los Angeles, and I learned that in most cases, the average college student is over the age of 25 or 30, as opposed to 18 to 22, which was my experience going to school. And I think sort of the experience that a lot of people think about for the average college student. But I realized that looking at the numbers, both at this institution as well as across the board, the average is a little bit older. So I was, I think, 26 and starting in this role. And so I was, about older than half of the students.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I walked away from that role and people thought I was crazy. You're a professor. You get invitations to speak everywhere. It's very prestigious. You're on TEDx this and you're this and that, and you walked away. And why did you walk away from that? And I realized it was because the role was too safe for me, and the role was too limiting for me. People say, "How? What do you mean it's too safe? It's too limiting?" Because it put too many limitations on the type of thinker I wanted to be, the type of writer I wanted to be, the type of person I wanted to be. It wanted me to manifest within a certain type of box or a certain type of experience. I'm not saying that does that for everybody, but I felt like it was doing that for me. And I'm certainly not against education. I'm very much pro learning, as opposed to say pro education. But I remember just seeing a lot of disappointment in people's eyes around me. They thought I was making a crazy move. But in retrospect, I think it was probably the sanest move I could have made. And I think a lot of times you hear people as well who leave their legal jobs as lawyers, or they leave certain jobs and they pursue these other wild passions, and they'll tell you it was the greatest decision of their life. And I think for me, I sort of fall into that camp. And I think a lot of people, based on your premise, would probably, if they think about it enough, would probably fall into our collective camp as well. They would say, I've been playing it safe, and the journey and the results haven't been good. They haven't been what's been promised to us. This quote unquote American dream, it's not quite a nightmare. It's not quite a dream, but it's really not what I anticipated. I think a lot of people would conclude. And so we have to put ourselves in positions to say, let's be counterintuitive thinkers, because there's a great quote from Mark Twain, and Mark Twain says, anytime we believe what the majority believes, we're in great danger, absolutely great danger. Because if it's safer to play it safe, is that really true? And I think the statistics bear it out. So America has the highest drug rates it's ever had, the highest depression rates, the highest suicide rates. And these are things that were before COVID. So COVID didn't start these things, it exacerbated them. But all of these things that you know much better than I do, and I'm sure many of your viewers or listeners do, but America has created the safest society in the world, presumably, and yet one of the unhealthiest, one of the scariest from a mental point of view, from an emotional point of view, from a relationship point of view. And I think partly it's because people are basically told that you can't live your dreams. You can't be who you're supposed to be, that you have to think like the majority. You have to play small. And it's never said that way, of course. It's always
Right.
presented in this very sort of sexy package. And the sexy package oftentimes turns out to be fool's gold. And
Mhm.
not for everybody, because there's always a generation of people that do well in the system. But if we're producing more people who are dissatisfied with the system, why do we keep promoting the system, Dr. Fred? It doesn't make sense
Mhm.
to me. And so I
Mm.
agree with your premise. It's counterintuitively, ironically, probably safer to play it less safe.
Isn't that right? I think that's what we're saying. It's safer to play it less safe.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. I think that is what we're saying. It's like, and the word counterintuitive has to go up for grabs too. It's sort of like counterintuitive, and therefore use your intuition. It's counterintuitive. Use your intuition. Go out there and do what your destiny manifests. Go out and create a future that actually works, in a way like your friend said, that works, that your friend
Mhm.
said, "Oh, surrender to the person
Mhm.
you are about to become."
Mhm.
And it's like, "Huh?"
Mhm.
I mean, that's the first answer, right? I'm busy being the person that I am. It's taken up all my time. I don't have any time to surrender to some dude I'm about to become.
Mhm.
And yet it is simply a matter of conversation, and then declaration, and then a willingness to explore the possibility that my destiny is manifested by the words and thoughts I put forward to inside of the self that I'm creating. Like, once one gets a little taste of that, bump of euphoria, then it becomes very attractive to manifest a destiny that actually works for me. Work like, oh wow, if I say something and that means it's the future I'm living into because I said so, then if that's like a reality, then I guess maybe that's how I should spend my life. Actually creating a world that works for me.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I strongly believe that the universe is run through conversation. I think it's run through conversations we have with ourselves, conversations we have with others, divine conversations, all sorts of conversations. There are trillions and quadrillions and all these types of conversations that are going on. And it's the conversations we choose to believe that
Hmm.
will determine our destinies, will determine our futures. And a lot of times I
Hmm.
think we're believing the wrong conversations because our futures are tied to our success or failure is tied to who we chose to believe. Are we going to believe Dr. Fred and Dr. Rob? Or are we going to believe somebody else? Who are we going to believe? Because whatever voice we believe is who we're going to become over time. And
Hmm.
my friend was trying to tell me, stop believing the voice of the past and start believing the voice of the future. And I didn't
Mm-hmm.
realize what this was because I said, well, I am who I am. I don't understand this sort of future, uncertain, nebulous voice of the future. And, I think it's sort of like in movies where the answer of who a person is or who they're called to become is given in the first 5 or 10 minutes, but the main character doesn't know it. And so they have to go through this long hero's journey for a couple of hours to come back to the conclusion that somebody else probably told them early on.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what happens where you'll have amazing folks like yourself who will say, we have to start surrendering to our future selves. And it can be challenging though, because the word surrender has all types of loaded
Mm-hmm.
meaning. It can be very negative,
Mm-hmm.
and so many people have
Mm-hmm.
been brought up in, I'm tough and I never quit, and there's this rise and grind mindset, and or they thought they had to be tough because they're from a broken family, or all sorts of reasons and rationales for why they can't surrender. And I think when we sort of are committed to not surrendering, that's where we're in the most danger, because that's when the levels of our pride or egos are highest, and that's when we don't have the humility to start asking ourselves new questions, and to start asking and having new conversations with ourselves and with each other. And so if we're not willing to, even as a premise, surrender who we currently are with some potential enhanced version of ourselves, then we've already lost going out of the
Mm-hmm.
gates. And again, it's scary. And I'm sure you've heard this quite often in your life. I've heard it over and over again in my life. People say, well, that's just the way that I am. And they'll sort of justify
Right.
their faults. And I sort of say, well, okay, that's just the way that you are. Why don't you want to be a better way? And they
Mm-hmm.
sort of say, well, no, I'm not going to surrender this vice, even if that vice hurts people close to them. And I think it's a very prideful, a very selfish way to live. And I'll just be very blunt about it. And I love people, I love humanity, but I think at the same time, too, we have to stop giving ourselves excuses for why we can't become better, for why we can't break addictions, for why we can't treat people in a kinder way. It's sort of like when somebody says, oh, they're deep down, they're a very, very nice person. Why should I have to search for it deep down? Why shouldn't it
Mm-hmm.
be right up front? Why shouldn't I meet the best representative of them on a day in and
Mm-hmm.
day out basis? Why are they not
Mm-hmm.
committed to being a pleasurable experience for me? I'm committed to be a pleasurable experience for them. And so I think we have to, when we surrender, raise our games a little bit, both in our personal lives and our professional lives. And
Mm-hmm.
and it can be scary because the thing people want to do the least is spend time alone, looking at themselves in the mirror, saying, I've got to change this, I've got to change that. I can tell you, Dr. Fred, I think a completely different person than 10 years ago. And I think even
Mm-hmm.
Spielberg said, if you're a different person year in and year out, if you're not a different person, you still have some of your same core characteristics, but if you're not smarter, if you're not wiser, if you're not a better decision maker, if you currently believe things that you never used to believe, then you start to have to question yourself a little bit. You say,
Mm-hmm.
okay,
Mm-hmm.
we have to evolve. We're an evolutionary species. And sometimes you sort of say, well, everyone else can evolve and society can evolve, but I'm going to stay the same. And
Mm-hmm.
it's sort of like this notion of, I'm the world's greatest driver and everybody else sucks as a driver. And we say, wait a second, maybe I'm a pretty bad driver too. And I think it's when we're willing to confront our own flaws in a compassionate way and say, okay, I know I can improve these things, is when we can surrender to the better, more enhanced future version of ourselves.
Thank you for that. Confronting flaws and then surrendering to a better version of myself. When do I get to say that what I'm doing, although, I'm standing upright, I'm breathing, I look pretty good, my kids are good, I got the education, I got the job, I got a partner, I've got, I live in a good neighborhood, the neighborhood I belong in, it's not great, but it's good enough. Is there ever room to just kind of stop and appreciate who I am right now? And I'm hearing a very satisfied man on the other side of this line. And I really wonder, how does that get played? So you've talked about not the past, yes, the future. And then there's something I'm really asking about, which is this thing they call in the middle, which is all we really indeed ever have, which is our present. How can I live a life that is actually working now? Is that a manifestation of me manifesting and surrendering to the future self I'm becoming?
That is an excellent question, Dr. Fred, and I really appreciate that you asked that. And it's interesting because I'm a very prayerful and meditative and spiritual person. And one of the things that I literally pray every day is, and it's going to sound very grandiose, but I think it's appropriate for this podcast because it's about big ideas and big thoughts and big humanity. I literally pray to I say, I want to be the most grateful man on the earth, the face of the earth. I want to be grateful for every moment. I want to be grateful for every person I meet. I want to be grateful for every opportunity that I have. And not just, oh, I have food or I have a roof, but truly, genuinely grateful, genuinely appreciative of it. And I think it's not just an attitude of gratitude, but really, truly having our soul filled full of appreciation towards the blessings and the gifts that we've been given that allows us to be content in the present and allows us to be joyous in the present and allows us to bring our best to the present. Because I think what's interesting is 50% of our minds are either in the past or the future. For most people, that's the average number. And so, how do I get to be 90% in the present or 100% in the present or somewhere up in a much higher level than at 50%? And I think that starts with true appreciation, truly declaring that appreciation. I get up every morning about 4:30 and I start with these appreciative affirmations, declarations of being grateful for my health, being grateful for my family, being grateful for the world, being grateful for all these things. But at the same time, also recognizing that I can improve and I can be better. And I think part of the challenge in society is we've tied improvement and growth with this notion of grinding. And so grinding is a very negative connotation. And so we think that in order for us to grow, it has to be painful. But my approach is when I look at myself in the mirror and I look at my many flaws, I sort of approach myself as the world's most compassionate coach. I say, well, I'm going to be compassionate at the same time. I'm going to identify what's not working and I'm going to move forward. So it's this weird kind of balancing act between, on the one hand, being very, very grateful and appreciative for what you have, but on the other hand, saying, I can do better, but I'm not going to call myself or believe negative things about myself. I'm not going to have the world's worst critic inside of my head. I'm not going to be a critic for myself. There are plenty of critics out there, plenty of people who will take the mantle of telling me how horrible I am, how misleading I am in terms of you're giving people false hope, all these types of things. Plenty of people will rise up. It's interesting, actually, if you look at the numbers, 25% of people in the earth will not like us, no matter what. They don't like the tone of our skin. They don't like what we wear. They don't like the fact that we're doctors. They don't like the fact that people might not be doctors. Then 24% of people will love us no matter what. Say, well, we just really like the sound of their voices. We just really like where they went to school. And then about 50% of people are somewhere in the middle and they neither like us nor dislike us and they can be persuaded. And I think a lot of times we sort of go around as the 25% of people ourselves who don't like ourselves. So we kind of identify with our own critics when we sort of come to look at self-examination and growth. And it's interesting because critics can have a point, but at the same time, we can't sort of filter their potential constructive criticism through these negative or dark filters as we tend to do. 85% of people are dissatisfied with themselves. They don't think they're good enough according to research. And so we have to get that negative voice out of our heads. And when we replace it with a positive, grateful voice, we can look at growth and change in a very healthy way as opposed to in a destructive way. Again, I know the analogies are apt, no pain, no gain, but at the same time, I think the analogy has been taken a little bit too far. And so that's why a lot of people are afraid of growth. It's not because they're lazy, it's because they think it's going to hurt them. And in some cases, it is going to stretch and it's going to sting. But at the same time, if you approach it in a positive way, it's so much better. Years ago, I'd gained some weight. And so I committed to losing a lot of weight, getting my body into shape. And I didn't start off like so many people say, okay, I'm going to lose this much weight in this month and, go out and really exhaust myself and then quit because I did too much. I sort of said, I'm going to make little micro commitments every day. And I'm going to start off with 10 minutes of walking a day. And then I'm going to increase that following week to 15 and then increase it again until I'm running. And then I'm going to add weightlifting to that and just sort of these little micro commitments and micro behaviors. And so I think when we combine the micro behaviors of growth and change with gratitude, we can put ourselves in a position where we're simultaneously in the moment, but also simultaneously working toward a better future self.
So again, your articulate nature in taking on what and how to live a life, what it takes and how to live a life that actually works, that is gloriously gratifying and that manifests a future that could not happen without doing so, and is extraordinary. And from the bio you sent over, I imagine the book that you wrote sort of addresses some of this or takes this into consideration, or maybe is the manifesto for that. Or tell us a little bit about this book. I know you're excited about it.
Yeah, well, thank you for mentioning it and bringing it up. And I'm extremely excited about it. It came out a few weeks ago. It's called The 48 Laws of Happiness, Secrets Revealed for Becoming the Happiest You. And it's really about the traps that we face in becoming happier in every area of our life, in our minds, in our emotions, in our relationships, in our bodies, our circumstances, workplaces, and in society or the universe. And I wrote it that way because I really felt that folks are facing traps like not feeling good enough. They're facing traps like imposter syndrome. They're facing traps like negative thinking or living in the past or the future and so many other things. And I wanted to give people both inspiration, but also a practical roadmap because growing up, I would always sort of be told, you can just choose to be happy in your mind. And I said, well, that's fantastic, but how the heck do I choose it? What do I need to do? Can I get some specifics? And so I wrote the book to give folks a GPS so that they can become happier no matter where they are in their own happiness spectrum. Because some people are born with lots of happiness because it can be partly genetic, but some people aren't. And so, nevertheless, we can still become happier despite where we are now. And the way I define happiness is really about liking who you are and be content with what you have, and also divorcing happiness from this notion of having perfect circumstances or having perfect relationships or having perfect money or perfect job or all the things that society tells us we need to have. And so, it is partly a manifesto of that. It's 400 pages of both science, of inspiration, as well as inspirational stories from people from all over the world of all different geographic backgrounds, demographic backgrounds, religious or non-religious backgrounds, that show us that happiness truly can be achieved in a universal way. And so, and many of the themes that we talked about today are in that book. There are many other books that I'm putting together now, and I also address these themes in one of my upcoming movies that's coming out this fall, and in projects that I'm working on in Hollywood. And so, I really am committed to trying to encourage and empower people to manifesting more positive realities because we're really not doing that in society. We're not typically doing in households. We're definitely not doing in school and in workplaces. And so I try to embed some of that within all of the different projects and works that I have.
Beautiful. And tell us a little bit about the film.
Absolutely. So the film is called American Dropout, and it's about the dropout crisis in the country. About 50 million people have dropped out over the last few decades. And this was prior to COVID. The numbers have worsened, unfortunately, since COVID. And one of the primary reasons people are dropping out is because of trauma. And because the trauma, and I don't have to tell you because I know you are an expert in this, but the trauma literally rewires their brains. It damages their neurotransmitters.
And when you say dropout, you're not just talking about university dropouts, you're talking about dropping out of society, or what are we really talking about
That's a
here?
fantastic question. Thank you for helping me clarify. So, dropping out of high school and middle school. So, about 50 million
Mm.
people have dropped out of high school, and typically they've cost Americans about $3 trillion in taxes. And it comes to incarceration. 85% of all inmates are dropouts, for example. 80% of crimes are committed by dropouts, for example. And it's really one of the most under addressed issues in society. And it's being driven by the mental health crisis we have in the country. And so I crisscrossed the country for a couple of years, working with the Kennedy family and with others, and really interviewing some really amazing kids who dropped out. And they tell their stories about why they dropped out and the mental health abuses that they face. One little girl, for example, literally would get woken up by her dad in the morning to go to school after he would throw water on her and tase her to get her up.
Mm.
And I just remember when I was filming that particular scene, looking at my hardened crew who'd been in Hollywood for maybe 30 decades or 3 decades in many cases, and they would sort of wipe tears back from their eyes because, they'd heard about these stories, but to meet people up close and personal. And so for me, making this particular film, I wanted to showcase to America not just the mental health crisis we're facing, but the implications that, it has, and also solutions for it. That there are people out there who are working on it, who want to improve it, but we have to come together and we have to implement the solutions that we know have worked on a small scale, on a much wider scale. So that's the movie. I'm super excited about it, and to see kind of the reception it'll have, and hopefully it'll improve a lot of kids' lives. I know there are a lot of people in a bipartisan way who worked in the Obama administration as well as in the Bush administration prior to that, who have come together to say we can stop this mental health crisis for kids as it relates to dropping out. And hopefully the movie can be an impetus for that.
Thank you. You mentioned now, and I had gotten this from Roselle, was the Obama administration. Now, you had a place in the Obama administration. Can you say a little bit about that?
I worked on the campaign, and I spent some brief intern time in the White House and just in a college capacity. But, it was an interesting experience. And I think one of the things that I learned from my experience in DC or my experience even working at university is how I feel I'm much better outside of the sort of institutional roles, that my calling was not to sort of be inside of those. But it was a fun experience. I learned a lot, met a lot of great people, and I think it helped shape the person I am today. And I'm really
Hmm.
grateful for the opportunity. I know, particularly early on, it helped open a lot of doors. When I came back to Los Angeles, I was appointed as the youngest commissioner of transportation in the history of Los Angeles, for example, which was interesting because I would do, I did my confirmation hearings, and I remember the head of the city council, she came up to me and said, "Where's the commissioner?" And I said, "That's me." And she said, "You look like you're 14." And I said, "Well, that's me." And so I feel like I've lived really extraordinary life, and really I'm grateful for it, and so I'm grateful for the opportunities in Washington for that, and for all the people who have really helped along the way, because without
Hmm.
people who would have loved me or taught me or cared for me or protected me or promoted me, I wouldn't be anything. And I think that's probably true for all of us. There are people who always care and who always help us, and especially if
Hmm.
very grateful, the more grateful we are, it seems, the more people are willing to open doors for us.
Definitely. And that goes to what you were saying about really, in some ways, manifesting the people that we surround ourselves with. Really getting that I am nothing other than my relationship with the people I surround myself with. And, if the listening is there for me to be spectacular, or for me to be, on the cutting edge, or for me to be a creator, or me to be a lover of humanity, then in order for me to do that, I really have to be a little bit diligent about who I spend my time talking with and being with. In other words, the way I think is not necessarily an independent silo, no matter who you put me near. It can be withered away if I was to surround myself with people who think, act, and speak in ways that are disempowering. So it is very important to surround ourselves with people who can play into our own power, who can stand for who they know us to be. Is that accurate? Are you consistent with that? What do you think?
Yeah, I completely agree, Dr. Fred. I think that we can't really advance beyond the people we surround ourselves with. And I think that if you want to be an eagle, you have to fly with eagles. You can't stay on the ground clucking with chickens. And
Hmm.
I think that part of the challenge is people don't want to hurt other people's feelings, or they don't want to take a step back if they're around negative folks. Or it can also become a discernment challenge, too, that I've seen, where people will surround themselves with smart, successful people who are playing it safe, and then they believe their doubts, for example. So let's say you have somebody and they want to go after a new dream, but they'll listen to their smart, successful friends who might even have a little bit more credibility than them, who talk them out of it. And so we have to be careful about not just surrounding ourselves with smart people or successful people, but we have to surround ourselves with people who are extraordinary dreamers if we want to try to live extraordinary lives. And so it's being very careful. And I've had to rearrange my personal and professional life many times over to surround myself with positive people, because it can be very easy to either just default to the people you grew up with or went to school with, or you hang out with at work, or it can be very easy to just kind of think that if somebody's successful or smart, that therefore they're supposed to be in your circle. And the reality is that's not necessarily the case. I think you have to surround yourself with positive people, because negativity, just like positivity, can be caught. It's contagious. And so, I've known lots of people, and I'm not denigrating the legal profession whatsoever, but I had a lot of lawyers in my circle, and these particular lawyers tended to be unhappy and negative and critical and cynical and pessimistic and all of those type of terms. And I had to distance myself from them. And they were making good money, and they were smart, and they were reasonable, and all of these sorts of things. But at the end of the day, I felt it was holding back my soul. I felt it was holding back my joy. I felt like we were in very different mindsets and pursuing very different things. I wasn't just trying to sort of be successful in the status quo. I was trying to change the status quo. I think you're always going to have people who will want to dominate the system as it is, and other people who want to change the system as it is. And so, depending on your dreams, if you want to dominate the existing system or if you want to change it, you should surround people that reflect whatever it is that you want to do in your life. And so that's going to require a constant recalibration of who's around you. And the other interesting thing too is if you're a positive person, you don't just always attract positive people. Sometimes you attract negative people, and they'll see it and they'll latch onto you, and you have to figure out how to empower them. But at the same time too, if they're not receiving it, how to distance yourself from them. And it's a tough balancing act, but it's absolutely worth it if you want to soar. And the reality is, like I mentioned before, most people have about 30,000 days on the earth. And why spend any of that time, if you can help it, with negative, cynical, depressing, sad people who aren't really interested in dreams? They're just interested in, whatever they're interested in. And so, we have a choice. And I think that's one message that I want to drive home, is we always have a choice in terms of how we curate our lives.
Beautiful, Rob. There's going to be a handful of listeners who are really interested in, getting on your path, listening to what you're about, learning from you, growing with you, seeing, maybe even contacting you. Perhaps you mentioned coaching is another space where you're able to be a massive contribution. How would our listeners get in touch with you?
Absolutely. So I've got a website called drrob.tv, and it has my contact information on there, as well as hundreds of free resources that are available to listeners to sort of empower them, to help them grow. And it's kind of done in a fun and entertaining way as well. So it'll be the top life lessons of Kobe Bryant or Oprah Winfrey, or the top life lessons you can learn from your favorite movies and more. And so you can log on to drrob.tv, free resources there. I have free ebooks as well as my contact information.
That's awesome. Rob, it's been a deep pleasure. This hour has gone by. For sure, it's the fastest hour I can recall. And I just trust that we could have a conversation that would keep going for hours. And I'm really pleased to acknowledge you as a new friend in my life, and really up to great things in your world. So thank you for coming on the Welcome to Humanity podcast. Is there anything else that you want to impart to our listeners? Wow, I'm looking at your website right now. I wish we would have been on visual. You're quite a handsome guy, Rob.
Oh. Thank you. I appreciate that. Man, my sister did some modeling back in college, and I've also done some acting as well. When I was in grad school at USC, I was cast in a series called Lethal Weapon on Fox that shot at Warner Brothers, and so I've been able to do a little bit of that as well, and do a lot of on air stuff. So I appreciate that. It's always fun to kind of have those TV kind of features.
Yeah, you do have some cool features. That's great. And coaching, is that something that you're open to, or is that something that you're taking new clients, or where are you at with that?
That's a great question. I'm always open to new possibilities. It's something that, with folks that I work with now, in terms of pro athletes or folks like that, it's just something I've kind of fallen into. And because I just love being able to listen to people, being able to offer my feedback to them, whatever I've learned, my learnings. But it's certainly something I'm open to, and it just really depends on the time of year, the season that I'm in. Usually in writing seasons, like I'm in now, I have a little bit more time. When I'm in movie making mode, I have a lot less time. And so it is something that I'm definitely open to. And in fact, I've got a new school that I just launched at Harvard University. It's not at Harvard, but I presented it first at Harvard, and it's kind of going all around, called the School of Happiness. And so I presented some coaching there for some of their PhDs and MDs, and that was a lot of fun. And so, yeah, but it is something that I'm open to, and it just on kind of a case by case. It's not something systematic that I do, just kind of given my schedule.
Yeah, you get to pick who your clients are. You get to who you work with, and you maybe, once your arms open up and you're ready for your next client, it seems like right then is when a student is ready, the teacher will come. So that's wonderful.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Rob Carpenter, thanks for being with us today. Thanks for being with me. Thanks for letting me introduce you to our listeners. Thanks for being exactly who you are, and all that it took. I mean, all that it took to be who you are and to make such a difference in the world. And really, there's something really easy about how you present this. You don't mince words, and there's no or maybe, or, the real access to something that really is working. And I love that you really know that this actually could work for any person who's willing to take on this, and begin a life of manifest destiny, if I dare, and really actually begin a life of creating a world of surrendering to the person that we are about to become. So thank you again, Rob Carpenter. It's been a deep pleasure. And for our listeners, another slice of humanity. What do you say? I mean, really fantastic stuff. And whatever is going on with you, pleasant or unpleasant, it's all just a foundation of being a human and living this human experience. So indeed, as we close, welcome to humanity, listeners, and welcome to humanity, Rob. Really wonderful to have you. We'll catch you on the next ride.
Thank you, Dr. Fred. Appreciate it.
Hey, welcome to Humanity family. It's Ryan Levesque here, co-producer of the show. I truly hope you enjoyed Dr. Fred's in-depth conversation today. If you did, and if the conversations we share each week are making a difference for you, could you please take just a moment to leave a rating and a short review on Apple Podcasts? Your enthusiastic review helps new listeners discover the show. Your support here really does make a difference. I'd also like to invite you to reach out to a friend or two who would appreciate today's episode. Maybe shoot them a quick text or email, or maybe pick up the phone and invite them to subscribe to the Welcome to Humanity podcast so they can be enriched from the discovery of amazing ideas and insights each week. As always, you can find past episodes along with the complete show notes and links at welcometohumanity.net/podcast. If you'd like to explore how working one-on-one with Dr. Fred can help you break through whatever challenges you might be facing with your mental health or well-being, leading to new levels of freedom and vitality, I invite you to reach out to us directly by emailing Dr. Fred at welcometohumanity.net. That's DRFRED at welcometohumanity.net. Thanks so much for listening, and keep an ear out for another captivating conversation next week. Have a beautiful day, a beautiful week, and indeed, a beautiful life. Welcome to humanity.